YouTube says it has had enough of vaccine misinformation on its site.
And false stories from phony sites to run circles around major news outlets.
Many people don't know the difference between something real and something created to deceive them.
Open your eyes.
If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. I wanted to show you some more bizarre things revolving around Camp Mystic and everything that's gone on in Texas. Because as I mentioned in a previous video, there's stories out there about how this is an elitist camp for very wealthy people in Texas to attend every single year. And the more stuff that comes out, the more this just kind of gives me a McMartin vibe. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other that there wasn't flooding. I'm not saying one way or the other that people aren't missing. But what I am saying is that the story has a lot of holes in it. And as most of us know, they can fabricate these stories by making people up and telling us that they exist, by having interviews with people that we've never seen before, actors that pop up on screen, kind of like we saw at Sandy Hook, where we had duping delight left and right. And we don't even know if any of those people existed in the first place. In fact, most of us know that they didn't. They can AI generate these images. We see how good the artificial intelligence is that they release to us to allow us to use. So one can only imagine just how advanced that technology is. We can have people that don't even exist in the first place. So then you say to yourself, well, why would they do that? Why would they flood out a place? Like I mentioned in the previous video, well, they could flood out a place if they're trying to get rid of evidence. Or there can be agendas tied into it, which we're going to see more and more of with the National Weather Service. So there are things to look at. And again, this gives me McMartin vibes. And anybody out there who might have stumbled upon my channel within the last couple of years, I know there are a lot of you who have been at my channel a couple of years, but don't know that I've been around since 2016 covering this. And really my inspiration for starting a channel, once I really woke up to everything. We had things like September 11th, we had things like Waco. But when I went even further back and I started investigating the McMartin preschool, that's really when I started to get deeper down the rabbit hole and understanding what these people were doing with children, with Aleister Crowley, with adrenochrome, the bloodlust that they have. And that's where my awakening really took center stage. So if you don't know about McMartin, the McMartin preschool, children came forward and confessed to being molested and being trafficked underneath the school. There were tunnels, and they were getting flown out to prestigious homes in and around California. Now, how this was discovered was a doctor was actually examining one of the children, and they found semen in his rectum. And from there, this enabled some of the children to have courage to come forward and admit to what was going on. Now, they use a lot of trauma techniques in these trafficking rings. That's why a lot of these kids never come forward. Now, it's easy for us to say, well, why wouldn't they come forward and confess to their parents or confess to someone else? Well, when you're a young child and you're threatened, when you see somebody commit murder in front of you, like a lot of these kids claim to see at McMartin, where these teachers were murdering rabbits and cats in front of them and telling them if they ever spoke about what was going on, that they would do the same thing to their pets and to their parents. Well, you probably would be afraid to speak, especially if you're a young child. You can't even comprehend what's going on. You don't know anything about sex or what's being done to you. You just know that you're scared. So these children, obviously, as most of you know, I'll get into it real quick, they were getting moved underground and they were getting flown out to these homes. Now, when this happened, the government came in and made a massive propaganda machine. They continued to just beat it into people's heads that this was a witch hunt, that these parents were trying to get rich, that they were actually using their 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old children, all of them together, and saying that there was some satanic conspiracy going on. That is where the satanic panic term actually started. And they dismissed the case after a while without ever going underneath the school. And once the case got dismissed, Ted Gunderson came in And they immediately tried to demolish the school. They immediately were going to demolish it and build a building on top so nobody could ever see what was going on underground. Well, Ted Gunderson, of course, as most of you know, as you could see in my video, which is available here on the website, did end up going underneath the school. And they brought in lots of excavators, excavation contractors to dig up what were filled in tunnels underneath the ground. And they found that the dirt in the ground didn't actually match the dirt around it. And then when they dug through this dirt, they found all sorts of things like plates with pentagrams, all sorts of things that we would relate to the occult. And these tunnels led directly to an airport. Of course, this never got tried again. This got thrown out. Everybody thinks that it's a satanic panic. They built a building on top, and that was the end of the story. So when we look at this story, there's some bizarre things to at least address and look at. I'm not saying one way or the other that I'm 100% right. I just have a very creepy vibe about some of the stuff that they've been showing us with this school. Now, if you use ChatGPT, and I didn't specifically use their demonic AI, but people out there have been posting, asking ChatGPT and Grok questions about Camp Mystic. And some of the stuff that's been coming up is talking about an association with Freemasonry. So Camp Mystic, while primarily known as a summer camp for girls, has been associated with various cultural and historical narratives, including connections to Freemasonry. Here are some key points regarding the connection. Founding. Camp Mystic was founded in 1926 by a group of women, including some who were connected to the Masonic community, which would be the Eastern Star. The camp was established with the intention of providing a nurturing environment for young girls, emphasizing values such as friendship, leadership, and personal growth. And as I've discussed many times, that's what they do. The Freemasons groom the Demolay boys. The Eastern Star witches groom the Rainbow Girls and the Job's daughters. And the videos that I've done on that in the past, you could watch for yourself and see how disturbing these rituals are. They're very strange rituals that they do. They might look like a dance rehearsal, but they're actually grooming these children and then using the guise of saying, well, they're going to be future leaders in America. They're going to be future CEOs of corporations. And of course, you got to know somebody to get into these clubs. Okay, you got to be recommended by a Freemason to become a Freemason. Same with the Eastern Star. So these kids were obviously being groomed by adults. So it goes on to say, Masonic influence, symbolism, some elements of the camp's traditions and rituals may reflect Masonic symbolism, which often emphasizes moral teachings, community service, and personal development. This influence can be seen in the camp's focus on character building and leadership skills. These are the terms that they use to deceive people. Okay? Philanthropy, I've talked about this many times. Philanthropy is their key. I have a book about Skull and Bones and how they're all trained in these secret societies, whether it's Freemasonry or it's an Ivy League school secret society. They're trained to be philanthropists, which is why you see these celebrities always come on television holding up giant checks, talking about how they're donating money. It creates a blockage in people's minds when they think that these people are something that they're not. Oh, they give all their money to the children's hospital. Oh, they give all their money to third world countries. This creates a perception where people actually will believe that Bill Gates is a wonderful guy, believe it or not. And they're all trained to do that. So they talk about leadership skills, character building. You know, we know Freemasonry make good men better. So it goes on to say community ties. The camp has historically attracted families with Masonic ties, leading to a cultural overlap between the camp's community and Masonic organizations. The connection may manifest in the camp's events, activities, and values that it promotes. And I gave you that list yesterday. I'll just give you a couple more of the political figures who are associated with Camp Mystic. You have George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Laura Bush, Lyndon B. Johnson, Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, former governor of Texas and U.S. Secretary of Energy, John Connally, former governor of Texas, Cecilia Abbott, First Lady of Texas, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, former U.S. Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, U.S. Senator from Texas. And they go on to brag about how, you know, Neiman Marcus, a lot of these big companies have executives that went through Camp Mystic. So it's clearly a grooming site. And then if you go, there's a website called blackmagictocontrol.com, if that's not creepy enough, right? Even using a little pumpkin as the logo. Well, it has Camp Mystic featured on there, and you can see what is the purpose of Magic Camp. It talks about Magic Camp, but when you look even further, it says, how much does the Mystic Camp cost for girls? It says Mystic Camp is a Texas women's training ground. Training ground. So those are words that should jump out at people and should make them ask questions. And obviously, if you're somebody who's completely asleep to this stuff and you heard someone like me talk about it, you'd be offended by it. Oh gosh, this guy's a kid. Oh, how dare he say that? Because they get so drawn into these stories. They don't know that our government fakes the news a lot of times to bring in agendas. And there's a lot of agendas that would tie into this with NextRad, with the weather modification towers, with more being put up, or even the switch over, which I'll cover in a minute, where NOAA wants to switch over to using AI specifically for their weather control. So one of the other things I thought was really suspicious is that somebody created a Camp Mystic Memorial channel on July the 5th. Now, at that time, there were already kids missing, but it's just very strange, right, that somebody would create this. Now, that doesn't mean that there's somebody out there that's not strange or weird who might see the story, feel compelled, but it's a little bit bizarre because we know how these stories pop up on Wikipedia before the fact. There's been stories in the past where there was already a definition and an answer and a whole page for Wikipedia before a crime is even committed or an act actually occurs, and it get published beforehand. Now, this wasn't published beforehand, but it's also just very strange. There's pictures of all these girls on this Camp Mystic, a couple of girls at least, on this Camp Mystic video, which of course you can't comment on, which is another thing that should make people raise their eyebrows when you can't comment on a video, right? The only time we see that is like where? The White House you can't comment on. You know, videos, the World Economic Forum you can't comment on, right? Now, I know there's people out there who are weak people who don't want any negative comments in the comment section. But you'd think somebody who made a channel devoted to the missing kids would allow comments and prayers, because that's pretty much what they're requesting in their About page, right? So they go on to talk about, place a comment with the title of the video. If you want the video to be removed, you can do it also by placing a comment, but you can't place comments. So, either this person's never used YouTube before, which could be possible, but it raises suspicion that they were pretty much already saying it's a memorial when these children their bodies haven't been found. There's people out there looking for the bodies, which I'm going to get into now because there's some suspicious behavior. As we know, a lot of these people end up being crisis actors. So first thing I'm going to show you is this clip. Texas officials blast National Weather Service for faulty forecasts and deadly flood disaster. They come out and they're saying, look, the National Weather Service gave us they said there was going to be 6 to 7 feet of rain within the hour. They got 30 feet, right? Now, we know they have weather modification. We know it's possible for them to flood out an area pretty quickly with geoengineering. We saw it in Dubai. But it certainly raises suspicion when these people, within hours of this happening, this is within hours of the event happening, are immediately pointing fingers at the blame game, right? Because this National Weather Service story has been a big story for the last couple of months. The Doge cuts, Donald Trump getting rid of the National Weather Service, right? And that's all about bringing in change. But these people aren't even out there looking for the bodies. They're doing interviews and they're immediately blaming the National Weather Service, which is a little bit suspicious, is it not? You would think if you lived in this community, your top priority would be looking for the children, because every minute that you're not looking for them is a chance that they could drown. They could be stuck in trees. They could be floating in the waters, needing somebody to come save them if they get hypothermia. And these people are out there pointing fingers at what is a national story that we keep hearing about, the National Weather Service. Listen.
Original forecast that we received on Wednesday from the National Weather Service predicted 3 to 6 inches of rain in the Concho Valley and 4 to 8 inches of rain in the Hill Country. We worked with our own meteorologists to fine-tune that weather statement, and as many of you know, and many of you in broadcast journalism and meteorology, you can go back and look at your own forecast, and the amount of rain that fell in this specific location was never in any of those forecasts.
This rain event sat on top of that and dumped more rain than what was forecasted on both of those forks. When we got the report, it was about 7 feet or so on the South Fork, and within a matter of minutes, it was up to 29 feet, and all of that converged at the Guadalupe, and that's where we saw those very quick rise in flood.
But listen, everybody got the forecast from the National Weather Service, right? You all got it. You're all in media. You got that forecast. It did not predict the amount of rain that we saw.
So it's also suspicious about that is 4 days ago, which is a day before this entire thing happened. There's a post on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's government website. So NOAA's National Hurricane Center, Google DeepMind, and Google Research are teaming up to maximize the benefits of a new AI weather forecast model to advance NOAA's mission to save lives, mitigate property loss, and improve the nation's economy by issuing the best forecasts of hurricanes. So what have we seen? What's the common theme? We're seeing the destruction of infrastructure, taking down everything that we know as normal, right? No, all of a sudden, aviation is a problem. Nobody can fly, right? But what's the whispers that come in afterwards? Well, we could switch over to AI and it'd be a lot safer. We could switch over to autonomous. It could be a lot better. So one day before this happens, you're telling me that NOAA has come out and talked about moving in the direction of artificial intelligence. A little bit suspicious, right? Google scientists team up to advance AI hurricane models. The other thing is, we could probably end up seeing more NEXRAD towers. For people that don't know, the next generation weather radar, these are weather modification towers. These are not there to give you a forecast so you can go on weatherchannel.com and watch the radar. This is one of the ways they use weather modification. They tell people that these towers are there so that they can monitor forecasts. But in reality, these towers are there to modify the forecast, okay? So we could see the actual expansion of NEXRAD. And remember those stories I covered just a couple of months ago, well, back in May, right? Militarized conspiracy theorist group believes radars are weather weapons and is trying to destroy them. Militia group threatening NWS radars, calling them weather weapons. How did NOAA respond? And then they put out all this propaganda about how they can't control the weather, yet they have it archived on their website of all the weather modification experiments that they do, right? So go figure. Now, the other thing we'll talk about here is some of the people involved, because there's a couple of people who popped up on the news that I'm a little bit weary of. And I'm not going to say one way or the other. I think we should all just take a look at it and see what everybody thinks, because people grieve in different ways. I understand that. I totally understand that. Okay, I've met people who are completely robotic and emotionless, who can lose a loved one and might not grieve at all. I'm the other way. I would be hysterical. I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be, if I had a child that got swept away, who I sent to camp, and then suddenly the next day they were gone and they died like that, anyway, really, I would be unconsolable. So the first thing I just want to show you is it always reminds me of, because people say, well, what are you saying? That these people are actors? It always reminds me of Shawshank Redemption. And I don't like to use too many movie clips ever, but just the notion of in Shawshank Redemption, if you remember that movie, if you haven't seen it, I'll explain it real quick. When he escapes prison, okay, he has a whole new identity set up. A man who walked into the bank that nobody had ever seen before, nobody ever laid eyes on him before. That's really what these Christ actors are. They're people that nobody would know. And if they resurfaced somewhere else, like some of these characters from Sandy Hook, nobody would notice, and they'd still call you a conspiracy theorist, right? Everyone remembers the FBI agent at the scene who ended up, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but also was David Wheeler, popped into my head. The FBI agent who was on the scene also was a grieving father. You could see distinctively it's the same person, right? Even has the mole on the face. Yet they come out and they go, oh, no, because it's not a household name, right? It's not, it's David Wheeler. Nobody knows who he is. So these people can take on roles. And this is what it reminds me of.
The next morning, right about the time Raquel was spilling her little secret, a man nobody ever laid eyes on before strolled into the Maine National Bank. Until that moment, he didn't exist, except on paper.
May I help you?
He had all the proper ID, driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, and the signature was a spot-on match.
So that being said, remember that these people could just be people that pop up out of nowhere, out of thin air, and then go about their lives without anybody ever knowing. Just give them a new name, like Andy Dufresne. Give them a new social security number, right? Give them a fictitious name on TV. Is anyone going to background check that or research? You find a lot of these people, too, who I'll show you in some of these clips, who don't even have social media accounts. Now, that's obviously normal to me because I don't have Facebook or any of that stuff. But to find teenage girls and stuff who are getting interviewed that aren't anywhere to be found on social media, it's a little bit strange. But I want you to listen to this father, okay? Because this guy is claiming that his daughter, and he has a couple slip-ups, got taken away in the storm. And again, if you're saying to yourself, well, why would they make this type of stuff up? Well, again, let me reiterate. If they're trying to cover up a crime scene, it's better to flood it out or burn it down than actually leave it sitting there. So you don't know if people were actually even at the camp. And of course, other things will come into play that we have to pay attention to when immediately police are talking about the National Weather Service and Trump is being blamed for this. Then you know that we have a narrative in place that they want to push and shove down our throats, not to mention, of course, climate change. Anytime there's something like this, they can come in and start saying, look, we got to change things. Climate change is out of control. And that's exactly what they will do. But listen to this father, okay, because he slips up twice. First, he talks about, he says, we got to find my children, but he only has one child, supposedly. He says, we got to find find my children. But he has one child. The other thing he mentions is that just a few hours previous to this interview, he saw a dead 8-year-old boy. And he shows no emotion whatsoever. Can you imagine? You're walking around and you see a dead 8-year-old laying on the side of the road or on the side of a riverbank somewhere. I mean, all right, it's not your kid. Maybe you wouldn't cry about it, but I think you'd be a little bit choked up. So this guy's interview was suspicious, and we know the kings of crisis acting are CNN. They always have the crisis actors positioned and put prominently on national news. So take a look at this and tell me what you think.
They just got washed away, and then a few seconds later, the phone went dead, and that's all we know.
There was a man from Beaumont who we heard just over the ridge here calling out for Joyce Catherine. Joyce Catherine, it's his daughter. He raced here yesterday and has been searching for her. His daughter was here with several friends staying at a cabin just up the river from here, and he has not heard from her, his 21-year-old daughter, since before the storms came through the area. I'm so sorry to meet you like this.
I know. We pray that all 4 of them are still alive.
All 4 are missing.
Yes, they're all missing, and it's been 4:00 yesterday morning that we were told that they were on the phone with Aiden's dad, who they own the house where they were. It was a very nice house, no longer there. And Aiden said, hey, I've got to go. I got to help Ella and Reese. So he gave the phone to Joyce Catherine. Joyce Catherine said, they just got washed away. And then a few seconds later, the phone went dead. And that's all we know. So we presume that she got washed away as well. And if you go back to where the house is, it's not a good sign. And that's why I was telling you, my son and I were walking, and I thought it was a mannequin. It was a little boy, about 8 or 10 years old, and he was dead. So we just...
You saw that this morning?
Yes. So we're just walking and doing the same thing we were doing. Look, when we stumbled across him. But hopefully we can find our children, our daughter and her friends, alive. So anyway, I ask you if you would pray, and whoever watches this thing, pray.
So that was obviously strange. There's no emotions whatsoever in regards to the actual 8-year-old boy. The whole thing with the phone call, well, we're on the phone at 4 a.m. He's not showing any emotion about his daughter, right? She gets swept away. We're assuming she got swept away. And the next thing you know, he's mentioning children when he's only got one child. So the other one is this clip with a girl who was at the camp who claimed to have gotten rescued. Now, you'll see duping delight. And sure, you could look at it and say, well, maybe she doesn't know how to emotionally grasp everything that's going on. But it just seems like a strange interview. And remember, this is an elitist camp. So this girl has been to this camp many times. But if you actually look at the home that they're sitting in, now it could be somewhere that they rented out. It's very suspicious because it looks staged. You'll see in the background, there's even a photo of the Beatles sitting on a dresser behind them. Now, if you want to tell me that this is a staged home that they just did the interview for, okay. But if you want to tell me that it's their home, would you find it a little bit suspicious? There's a picture of the Beatles. You have a picture of the Beatles like in a bookshelf. One thing to have a poster of something, even though that's idol worship. I mean, you got a poster of something, you got a poster of something. To have it placed on a bookshelf where you would usually have pictures of your kids, your pets, family vacations, a little strange, and we all obviously know the connection with the Beatles and Tavistock and social engineering. They were the first big experiment. But here's this interview with this girl, and just take note of some of the weird stuff that is said about, talking about the camp and how the camp will never be, and using the camp's rhyme and, the song of the camp. But these people aren't out looking for any of these missing kids. They're not helping in the search. She's just sitting there in a mini skirt, which couldn't be shorter, by the way, for a 13-year-old. It's disgusting. Sitting there, smiling, talking about the camp, no tears whatsoever. I would think if I was in a situation like this where I almost got swept away in a flood out of nowhere, not only would I be traumatized, but if my friends went to the camp, I'd probably be out looking for them. So this is an elitist family. Again, the mother has been sending the kid here for about 6 years, which means the kid's well-groomed for things like this, because that's what the Eastern Star and the Freemasons do to children. This is one of the big things that I believe gets me censored all the time, is the exposure of Freemasonry, DeMolay, Rainbow Girls. Yes, I get it with stuff like Pizzagate. That can get you censored too. We're talking about some of these topics with adrenochrome, trying to talk around it. But really, it's the mindset of understanding secret societies. And just imagine if you had a group of kids who looked up to you, and then you had access to them for a long period of time, and your belief was in Lucifer being God, and you're better than everyone else, and you're going to change the world, and you're going to make people live by your rules, it'd be pretty easy to groom them. These kids are young children. So this girl has been groomed for 6 years at this camp. So take a look at this and tell me what you think.
Heartbreak across Texas as the death toll rises again following the flooding in central Texas. 51 people are now confirmed dead, including 15 children. Crews continue working around the clock through flooded out roadways and bridges, trying to find survivors. Governor Greg Abbott maintains this remains a rescue mission, not recovery. Now here's a look at some of the victims in this disaster. Many families mourning their losses as others are awaiting answers. This is what's left of Camp Mystic following the flood early Friday morning. The main road to there is washed out. Some campers, they're actually trapped in muddy bunks, clinging for safety, waiting for rescue. Tonight, we are hearing from a Dallas camper that was rescued from Camp Mystic. Staying on higher ground, she was safe from the floodwaters, yet remains heartbroken for those deeply impacted. She and her mother sat down with NBC5's Katie Blakey.
How are you doing today?
I think while it was going on, I kind of felt like a sense of numbness. Saying it out loud is making me realize what actually happened and how bad it actually is.
Just days after being dropped off to start a much anticipated July term at Camp Mystic, 13-year-old Stella is now processing the rains that ravaged the beloved camp and claimed the lives of so many children. Her 6th summer at Mystic, Stella was on the Cypress Lake side when storms awoke her cabin early Friday morning. On higher ground and out of view of the Guadalupe side, it wasn't until helicopters began buzzing overhead she realized something was truly wrong.
I think it's the uncertainty that really shook up our cabin.
Eventually, they were told campers along the Guadalupe had been evacuated due to flooding, but had no idea the scope of the crisis.
Eventually, when we got that news, we were all like hysterical and praying a lot, and the whole cabin was like really, really terrified. But not for ourselves.
Worried for those on the other side. It wasn't until military trucks arrived to evacuate their camp late Friday did they get a first glimpse of the devastation.
You'd see kayaks like in trees, and it was kind of horrific because we had no idea. Some people saw a couple trunks and just like in the debris, and then there was first responders in the water pulling out like girls, like sheets. I saw someone holding like a cloth from the water, and there were huge trees ripped out of the ground and like their roots, and it didn't look like Camp Mystic anymore.
Their thoughts remain with those grieving and those still waiting.
We are just so happy that she is safe and we are with her and we have her. So we are just grateful to be some of the fortunate ones. So there's a sense of relief and an equal sense of just awareness of that's not everybody's story.
They are comforted by words often echoed by camp leaders.
A bell is not a bell until you ring it. A song is not a song until you sing it. The love in your heart was not put there to stay. Love is not love until you give it away. It really showed me how much of an impact Camp Mystic has had on our lives, and how amazing of a place it is, and how horrible it is to see it like this, because that's not Camp Mystic.
In Dallas, Katie Blakey, NBC5.
So those are all things that I thought were very strange about this specific story. You know, you got a young girl here who doesn't seem to be too emotional. You got the father who seems to be completely, he was just walking by a dead 8-year-old, right? And he's just like, we got to just look for my daughter. And, we got to find my children. I mean, the children. And there's not a tear coming out of his eye. Now, again, you could react however you want. Everybody has different emotions. I do understand that. But when we look at these stories, we have to pay attention to who these people are, who they claim to be. Because a lot of the times these people don't exist in the first place. And this is how they manufacture news. This is how they get you sucked in, and then people out there get very offended by it, as all of you have seen. How many people have shut down my channels over covering crisis actors, right? David Hogg, when that happened, talking about how David Hogg was going to become some big political figure. What's David Hogg now? Well, his father was in the FBI. Now David Hogg is on the news every day. Nobody knows how he makes income because our tax money probably just puts it in his pocket. And he's a gun, anti-gun lobbyist, etc. Right? I said it that day when Parkland actually happened. That's how they do this stuff. They groom these kids for bigger roles in the world. Oh boy, he was a hero in the face of the Parkland shooting. Now he's a big activist. Soon you'll see him in politics when he's old enough to be a senator, right? Soon you'll probably see this girl, the head of Goldman Sachs or something like that, right? And they'll say, oh, how brave she was, how she stood in the face of adversity. But nobody questions if there's any validity to these stories. So I look at this story and I got just a weird feeling when I saw it. I got goosebumps. It reminded me a little bit of McMartin. Obviously, it reminded me of Lahaina with the missing children. And the way that this whole thing is being structured, it's just a little bit bizarre. Because even now, this is days later, the water has come down. And it's not completely down, but people are walking around the area and nobody's finding any bodies. Nobody's finding anything. Nobody's finding clothing for the most part. And that girl went out of her way to talk about, a story that sounded manufactured. Oh, she reached down and she grabbed a cloth out of the water. Sounds fictional. It sounds manufactured. There's no motion behind it. And we know the government stages these events. So what you do is you pay attention to what narratives come out after the fact. And wherever this heads with NOAA and NEXRAD and artificial intelligence and weather forecasting, which again, the police talking about it almost immediately, it should raise people's suspicions. And people should be going, I don't know if that, shouldn't you guys be on the ground looking for the bodies? Oh, you got to do a press conference? Well, why are you doing the blame game? Why don't you just say, hey, we got to find, go look for these kids. And the blame game happens to be a major government narrative about DOJ and about shutting down these agencies so that they could bring in artificial intelligence. So I had a McMartin vibe from it. I'm curious to see what everybody out there thinks. Again, I'm not saying 100%, but the connections with the elitist families, with Freemason, or even ChatGPT mentioning Freemasonry. And then you go through some of these websites that talk about the camp and they call it Magic Camp and they call it training grounds. Okay? I mean, if it's a little bit suspicious. It's got McMartin vibes. That's definitely for sure. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.